1947, a year of huge change as the British Empire began to crumble.
1947, the U.S. tried to lay the foundation for a new global economic order while strengthening its opposition to forces of autocratic communism.
And 4 of the former Axis nations made peace with the United Nations alliance, while occupied Germany and Japan formally remained at war.
The microwave oven arrived in U.S. kitchens, changing the way Americans cook and eat forever.
I'm Indy Neidell.
I'm Spartacus Olsson, and this is War to War News.
Brought to you by TimeGhost, makers of the finest history that money cannot even buy.
The year 1947 has come to an end, and in some places so has World War II. As 2 years after armistice, the world is settling into a post-war order with the former Axis powers brought firmly to heel.
While Joseph Stalin's USSR continued to draw Central and Eastern European countries into ever tighter control, the Western Allies began to consolidate their control over resource-rich Western Germany.
The British and Americans joined their occupation zones into a common administration in what is being aptly branded a single buy zone. France, however, chooses to continue to administrate their occupation alone and apart from the others.
In Paris, they hosted the signing of the first peace treaties on February 10th. The Allies are now formally at peace with Italy, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Finland. The agreements also settled the reparations and territorial changes into international law.
On their eastern border, Italy ceded Istria, Fiume, Zara, and most of Venezia Giulia to Yugoslavia. Part of the northeastern border area became the Free Territory of Trieste. The Dodecanese Islands were transferred to Greece. In the west, a few small areas went to France. Notably, though, the Italians were forced to give up their colonial empire and recognize the independence of Ethiopia and Albania.
Hungary was required to return almost all territories gained between 1938 and 1941, reverting largely to the boundaries set by the 1920 Treaty of Trianon. In particular, Hungary had to cede northern Transylvania back to Romania.
While Romania regained that territory, they were forced to acknowledge the Soviet Union's annexation of Bessarabia and northern Bukovina, taken by the USSR in 1940. In neighboring Bulgaria, parts of Greek Macedonia and Thrace taken during the war were restored to Greece. However, the treaty confirmed Bulgaria's possession of southern Dobruja, taken from Romania in 1940.
Finland formally lost the Karelian Isthmus, including Viipuri and parts of eastern Karelia, as well as the Petsamo region in the far north, and leased Porkala near Helsinki as a Soviet naval base. These concessions effectively reaffirmed and expanded the territorial losses Finland had accepted after the 1939 and 40 Winter War.
Meanwhile, Germany and Japan formally remain at war with the former Allied nations. However, as stipulated by their terms of capitulation, the Japanese adopted a new constitution. It renounces war, limits the emperor's powers, and establishes a parliamentary system and broad civil liberties.
While Japan joined the list of democratic states, the focus in Europe was on rebuilding. On June the 5th, former Chief of Staff of the U.S. Armed Forces, now Secretary of State George Marshall, outlined the European Recovery Program, meant to become a cornerstone of post-war reconstruction.
On October 30th, 23 nations entered into the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT. The treaty reduces trade barriers and lays the groundwork for a modern global trade system. It is the hope that this will serve to increase mutual prosperity, facilitate international cooperation, and foster peaceful coexistence.
But the truly big news in geopolitics came in August, when the wartime promise of independence was extended to the people of British India.
Yes. The pressure on Great Britain, both from within and without, to decolonize seems to have borne fruit. As we saw in our coverage for the year, the timetable for a power transfer in British India went into high gear.
On August 14th and 15th, the subcontinent was partitioned into 2 dominions when Pakistan and India declared independence. The partition lines, drawn hastily under the supervision of Sir Cyril Radcliffe, were meant to create homelands for the Muslim-majority areas in the northwest and east, and the Hindu-majority regions in the rest. Jawaharlal Nehru is India's first prime minister, while Muhammad Ali Jinnah now leads Pakistan as its governor-general.
But communal violence erupted immediately, and as the year ends, we're still seeing the effects of one of the largest forced migrations in human history, with an estimated 12 to 15 million people crossing the borders amidst turmoil. Widespread massacres and sectarian conflicts have already claimed hundreds of thousands of lives.
Although it's not the end of the British Empire, losing its crown jewel might very well signify the beginning of the end. The empire lost around 400 million inhabitants. That's like 2/3 of the total imperial population.
Well, it still has the Commonwealth, of which India and Pakistan remain a part. To not mention a number of colonies in Africa like Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and in the Caribbean like Jamaica, and in Asia with Hong Kong, Brunei, and British Malaya.
But for how long, though? Voices calling for independence are being raised in most, if not all, of these places.
Yes. Another British dominion that they are losing, or should I say are leaving, is British Palestine. In the summer, they announced that by next year, 1948, they will be out.
Yeah, it would seem that the constant conflict between them, the Jewish Palestinians, the Arab Palestinians, reached the limits of British patience. Unrest has been in a more or less constant increase since last year's bombing by Jewish terror group Irgun of the British Mandate administrative offices housed in Hotel King David.
To quench these constant fires from erupting out of the hot glowing embers of ethnic strife, on November 29th, the United Nations proposed a two-state solution.
For more on that, let's hear from political correspondent Sebastian Brandstetter.
Thank you, Indy. The measure outlines the partition of the region into separate Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem designated as an international territory under UN administration. The voting produced a lively debate among member nations, reflecting wide divergences of opinion on how best to address conflicting national aspirations. Supporters of the resolution argue that dividing the land is the fairest approach, offering distinct homelands and political structures for each community. Opponents caution that the plan could sow further discord in the region, already burdened by historical grievances and religious sensitivities. Yet, the mood within the General Assembly is one of cautious optimism. Many delegates believe this carefully negotiated blueprint could pave the way for peaceful coexistence. Indeed, key international figures and observers hope the new states, once established, will develop cooperative economic ties and political stability. As of this broadcast, preparations are underway to implement a partition plan, though uncertainties persist regarding local acceptance and the prospect of maintaining lasting peace. Stay tuned for further updates. Back to Indy and Spartacus.
Only days before the UN proposal, Crown Princess Elizabeth of the United Kingdom and the faltering British Empire weds Philip Mountbatten. Against the backdrop of Britain's challenges, this social event goes far beyond simple gossip interest. For more on that, we turn to our royal correspondent, Astrid Deinhard.
Thank you, Spartacus. For sure, there was also a little bit of gossip. However, any controversy about Mountbatten's family relations to Nazi Germany was pretty much absent from the press. But the fairy tale aspects of young royalty did capture many hearts in the month leading up to the handsome young couple's happy day. Magazines around the world were full of news about dresses, guests, and the ceremonial. The BBC World Service tells us that well over 200 million listeners around the globe tuned in to hear the union of Princess Elizabeth and Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten. The ceremony stood as a remarkable beacon of hope for a nation still grappling with the after effects of the Second World War. Despite austerity measures and rationing, citizens across Britain found renewed morale in the royal occasion. Many viewing the future Queen, the eldest daughter of King George VI, as a figure who, despite the loss of India, will eventually preside over a global empire stretching across many continents. There is hope that Princess Elizabeth's marriage and one day her accessions will breathe fresh life into an empire seeking to modernize. Some are already suggesting that her leadership will steer the British Commonwealth of Nations into a liberal framework that could unite the many diverse people who will be her subjects. During the wedding, the princess put on full display her sense of duty and service. In these uncertain times, her youthful vigor seems to embody both tradition and progress, raising expectations that she will guide Britain towards stability and continuing global responsibility.
Thank you, Astrid. It was not only Great Britain that struggled with a reordering of the geopolitical landscape. After the shocking espionage revelations of last year, 1947 saw a hardening of the fronts between East and West in what is now being called a Cold War.
In the US, there was a growing feeling that concerted efforts were needed to support nations striving for the self-determined sovereignty and human rights enshrined in the Atlantic Charter of World War II, expanded 2 years ago into the UN Charter.
With fascism looking mostly defeated for now, the greatest enemy is seen as the authoritarianism and unilateralism of communism. This is reinforced not only through the espionage revelations, but also through the Soviet encroachment in Eastern Europe, Mao's and Chiang's war in China, and the civil wars that followed the erupting independence struggles across the globe.
That is the situation in Greece, where civil war between communists and nationalists rages, and in Turkey, where Moscow is putting on more and more pressure. The US administration sees both as geographic bulwarks to block Soviet westward expansion.
As a result, on March the 12th, US President Truman announces his new doctrine for communist containment and support for nations threatened by outside interference or internal subversion. He tells Congress, "I believe that it must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. I believe we must help free peoples to work out their own destinies in their own way."
In essence, it frames America as the main defender of the free peoples across the world. It makes a dedication to a democracy worldwide and preserve international stability, signaling a commitment to global involvement even in peacetime. The doctrine formally ends the on and off isolationism that has been the backbone of US foreign policy for a century and a half.
Then, in July, Truman signs the U.S. National Security Act, laying the foundations for an extensive national and international intelligence and defense apparatus. Modeled on the lessons of World War II, it outlines a network of centrally coordinated organizations under nominal democratic oversight by Congress.
2 months later, on October 5th, in an indirect response, the Soviet-controlled communist parties of the USSR and Eastern Europe create the Cominform, a central bureau to coordinate communist ideology and propaganda.
Similar streamlining efforts to control public discourse during the war in the West ended with peacetime, and the past 2 years have seen an increase in willingness by mainstream media and artists to address more controversial topics.
This year marked another milestone in the politicization of media, but that was not met with enthusiasm everywhere, especially in the US under growing fears of communist infiltration of society.
We have a special report about these developments by our media and Hollywood correspondent, Anna Deinhard.
1947 has been transformative in media. The post-war trend towards serious, darker topics has continued, even in studio films. In April, Monsieur Verdot, helmed by that most famous film star of them all, Charlie Chaplin, arrived as a darkly comic satire on murder, capitalism, and moral hypocrisy. An unusual, bold Hollywood release which only recently would have been censored. In May, Robert Penzwarren's All the King's Men won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, spotlighting the perils of political demagoguery. Some works addresses wartime trauma directly. In June, France saw Albert Camus' La Peste, exploring moral responsibility under oppression. The same month, The Diary of a Young Girl by the late Anne Frank appeared in the Netherlands. It's Miss Frank's actual diary, a young German Dutch Jewish girl forced to hide from the Nazis for years. She perished in the camps shortly before the war's end, but her father survived to share her tragic yet hopeful account. Another recent spotlight on Jewish persecution was Elia Kazan's Gentleman's Agreement, starring Gregory Peck, which opened in November and ventured into the sensitive topic of anti-Semitism, sparking wide discussions beyond cinema. Mainstream artists now openly engage with prejudice, corruption, and moral conflict. Not everyone welcomes this, especially in America, where Congress has shown interest and triggered accusations of subversive intentions among some left-wing artists. In November, Hollywood's political engagement drew scrutiny from the House Un-American Activities Committee, fueled by suspicion that communists lurk among Tinseltown's creative ranks. On that note, I can only quote the wisdom of 15-year-old Anne Frank. So far, all those who have tried to impose their versions of what's right on others have failed. After a few years, or even longer, people always want their freedom and their own rights back. This is because having to obey one concept of right is inherently unjust. Back to you, boys.
Thank you, Anna. While these new ideas took flight during the year, actual flight saw a virtual explosion of development too.
Let's start with rocketry. On February 20th, we sent animals outside of our atmosphere for the first time ever when an American V2 rocket went 107 kilometers into near space. The passengers, a container full of fruit flies that was then returned to Earth by parachute. Scientists hope to learn more about the effects of space on biological entities in preparation for human exploration of the void. Although, it seems a frightfully big step from fruit flies to mankind.
In July, reports of biology coming from outer space began to circulate in U.S. media after witnesses claimed to have seen extraterrestrial beings crash landing on Mother Earth near Roswell, New Mexico. Apparently, some kind of unidentified flying object came down near a secret government facility there, and rumors have it that some kind of aliens were extracted from the wreckage by the military.
The government has so far kept mum about any earthly explanation, and since there has been a growing public interest in the possibility of Martians visiting us, with several sightings of flying saucers and other such phenomena reported.
Returning to the domain of reality.
Right.
On October 14th, the sound barrier, until then believed by many to be insurmountable for mankind, was broken. Piloting an experimental jet plane, the Bell X-1, test pilot Chuck Yeager exceeded the speed of sound for the first time ever, lived to tell the tale, and brought us into the supersonic age with what engineers and scientists are calling a sonic boom. Apparently, that's what happens when you pass that barrier. It goes boom.
Okay, that's cool, but it's got to be scary. But in any case, U.S. armed forces are now hard at work to incorporate this development into their efforts to create tomorrow's warplanes. On December 17th, a 6-engine swept-wing bomber jet, the Boeing B-47 Stratojet, took to the skies for the first time. The hope at the Pentagon is that this long-distance superplane will soon be able to carry payloads of atomic bombs to any corner of the world.
And on the seas, a remarkable feat was also achieved this year. Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl and his skeleton crew sailed a balsa wood raft from Peru to Polynesia. Heyerdahl's idea was to prove that people in primitive, prehistoric boats could have safely navigated and crossed the daunting distances of the Pacific Ocean. As an explanation for how humanity was able to spread out in the thousands of islands of Polynesia that lay many, many leagues apart.
And here are some more headlines before we end the year's coverage. Another barrier, the color barrier, was broken on April 15th in baseball when Jackie Robinson started for the Brooklyn Dodgers as the first major league player of color. Well, the first since the 1880s when the color barrier became official. By the end of the season, 4 more black players took the field for major league teams.
In fashion, Christian Dior's new look came to the runways, marking a return to more feminine styles, ending the garçon era of the interwar and war years with revolutionary silhouettes in cinched waists and full skirts.
In home cooking, the atomic age came into our homes when Raytheon introduced the radar range, an oven, right? It heats up your food virtually instantly by nuking it with microwaves.
Nuking?
Yeah, like a nuclear weapon.
Nuking?
Sure, why not? I'm gonna roll with that. Nuking food. Look, it sounds delicious. You heard it here first.
Okay, but it's not really run by nuclear power.
No, of course it's not run by nuclear power. But once these modern microwave marvels become ubiquitous, I am sure the expression will catch on.
That might confuse people.
Then, on that note of confusion, we shall end our coverage of 1947. When we return in the first quarter of 1948, I will take you on a journey to Greece and the civil war that is raging there.
It is the 10,000 members of the TimeGhost Army who make all of what we do possible. Join the ranks of this force to disperse confusion and misconceptions about our past by signing up on timeghost.com or patreon.tv.
And we will see you next time in the country of philosophizers. Yep, philosophizers, azure waters, and political turmoil. Excelsior!